Have you ever laid awake at night wondering what more you could have done, what you should have done differently as a parent? You gave your life to them. You worked hard, maybe even took on 2 jobs. You wiped tears, made sacrifices, and said no to yourself more times than you could count just to say yes to your children. That's what love looks like, right? But now, years later, something doesn't feel right. You're left walking on eggshells in your own home, or worse, in your own heart. Conversations that used to be warm are now sharp. Simple misunderstandings explode into accusations. You find yourself constantly apologizing, bending, explaining, even when you know deep down you didn't do anything wrong. And still, they blame you. They twist your words. They guilt trip you, ghost you, or come back only when they want something. If this sounds familiar, I want you to hear something loud and clear. You are not crazy, and you are not alone. Many parents, especially those over 60, quietly carry this pain. It's not easy to talk about because the world expects parents to always be forgiving, always available, always accepting, no matter what. But when you're dealing with a child who shows deeply harmful behavioral patterns, the rules change. Now I know how hard it is to accept that reality. It's not a label we ever want to place on someone we once rocked to sleep or taught how to ride a bike. But the truth is, this pattern isn't just about vanity or selfishness. It's a deeper cycle of manipulation, blame shifting, emotional harm, and a sense of entitlement. And when it shows up in your own child, it can be devastating. Today, we're going to talk about why you should not feel pressured to forgive a child who repeatedly causes emotional damage, at least not in the traditional sense. Because sometimes, what people call forgiveness is really just reopening a wound that hasn't healed. And that's not what you deserve. So let's talk about the first reason. And I want you to really sit with this, because it may challenge everything you've been taught about parenting, love, and what it means to be a good person. You should not rush to forgive your child because they are still hurting you. That might be hard to admit, but think about it carefully. Forgiveness isn't magic. It doesn't instantly heal a bruise or erase a betrayal. It doesn't mean your child will suddenly gain insight, offer a sincere apology, and change their behavior. In fact, when a child shows deeply ingrained patterns of self-centered and manipulative behavior, forgiving too quickly can send the exact wrong message. It tells them, "You can hurt me, and I'll let you back in." And they will use that over and over again. Maybe they'll say just enough sweet words to lower your guard. Maybe they'll cry or blame someone else, or even promise that things will be different. But the moment your back is turned, the cycle begins again. The silent treatments, the criticism, the lies, the guilt. And here you are again, wondering what went wrong, feeling like you failed as a parent, and carrying a burden that was never yours to begin with. It's not your job to absorb their pain. It's not your job to become their emotional punching bag. Forgiving someone who is still harming you isn't healing, it's self-neglect. And when that person is your child, it cuts even deeper because the world tells you, but they're your family. Yes, and family should never be an excuse for abuse. Now here's the second reason to pause before offering forgiveness too freely, because it is their nature. That might sound harsh, but stay with me. When you've raised someone with love, taught them values, modeled kindness, and they still choose manipulation and cruelty as their way of relating, it's not about what you did wrong. It's about who they are choosing to be. A child with deeply unhealthy behavior patterns often sees the world through a lens of entitlement. They believe they deserve more. They rewrite history to cast themselves as the victim. They can take your most heartfelt act of love and twist it into something selfish or manipulative. And no matter how much you do for them, it's never enough. That's not something you caused, and it's not something you can fix. Think of it like this. If you had a pet cat and that cat kept eating your goldfish, would you keep buying more goldfish and expecting the cat to change? Of course not, because you understand that's the cat's instinct. It's what it does. It doesn't hate the fish. It just sees it as food. And in much the same way, this kind of person doesn't truly hate you. They simply see you as a means to an end. a source of comfort, of money, of validation, of someone they can control, manipulate with guilt, or use to feel powerful. That's not love. That's not respect. And that's not the kind of relationship you deserve to keep forgiving and returning to. Which brings me to something deeply important. If they don't feel guilt, if they don't take responsibility, then what are you forgiving? You're not forgiving an apology. You're not forgiving a changed heart. You're forgiving the same pattern on repeat, hoping this time it'll be different. But it won't be. And I know what some of you may be thinking, but I want to forgive. I want peace. And that is beautiful. Because forgiveness, in its truest form, is a gift you give yourself. It's not something you hand to someone who's going to weaponize it. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength, but only when it comes with boundaries. You can forgive someone internally, release the anger, the resentment, the pain. But that doesn't mean you have to let them back into your life. It doesn't mean you have to pick up the phone every time they call or allow them to speak to you with disrespect. You are allowed to protect your peace. And if nobody's ever told you that before, let me say it again. You are allowed to protect your peace. There comes a time in life where peace matters more than pleasing people, more than proving your worth, more than saving a relationship that's only hurting you. Because healing isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing freedom over frustration, strength over silence, and love, real love, for yourself. So you've given your heart, your time, your trust, and somehow it's never enough. The words get turned around, the past gets rewritten, and no matter what you do, it's always your fault. You've probably heard things like, "You were never there for me," or "You always made everything about you," even though you spent years doing everything you could just to make sure they had a better life. And yet somehow they've convinced you they're the victim. This is where we need to talk about something many loving parents don't realize until it's far too late. A child who consistently exploits others will often use your forgiveness as a weapon, not as a path to reconciliation, not as a sign to change, but as a tool to gain more control. They'll say what you want to hear, not because they mean it, but because it gives them access. And once they're back in, they'll twist your forgiveness into something they can use against you. Maybe you've experienced this already. You forgave them for something painful, maybe a cruel insult or a long period of silence, and not long after, you found yourself being blamed for their behavior. You heard things like, "Well, if you really forgave me, you wouldn't keep bringing it up." Or, "You're always playing the victim." Suddenly, the conversation is flipped. You're being gaslighted. You start questioning what even happened in the first place. Was it really that bad? Maybe you are being too sensitive. And this is exactly how people with deeply manipulative behavior patterns operate. They chip away at your memory, your self-trust, your sense of clarity. The more you try to understand them, the more confused you feel. The more you try to forgive, the more guilty you become. It's not healing, it's psychological quicksand. And the harder you try to fix it, the deeper you sink. Now I want to pause here and say something important. This is not your fault. You loved them. You raised them. You probably still remember the sound of their laughter when they were little. That love doesn't just disappear. That love is what makes this so painful and so hard to walk away from. But it's also what makes you vulnerable. See, children who display deeply harmful behavior patterns know that you want a relationship. They know that part of you is always hoping for that moment, just one, when they show real appreciation, real change, real love. So when you offer forgiveness, they see it as a door. And instead of stepping through with grace, they barge in with demands, accusations, or worse, more emotional abuse. It's not closure. It's a revolving door of chaos. And here's what makes it even more dangerous. That cycle. It starts to feel familiar. You get used to the roller coaster. The highs when they're nice again, the lows when they lash out. And somewhere along the way, it starts to feel like this is just how our relationship is. But it doesn't have to be. It shouldn't be. You didn't raise them to hurt you. You didn't give them everything you had so they could turn around and treat you like you're disposable. You deserve a relationship based on mutual respect, not emotional manipulation. And that brings me to the next truth, one that may be hard to hear, but can also set you free. Your child is not looking for forgiveness. They're looking for leverage. They want access to your time, your money, your energy, your emotional availability. And forgiveness, to them, is a shortcut, a passcode to get back in. But once they're in, nothing changes. They don't see your forgiveness as a sign of maturity or grace. They see it as weakness, as permission, as a green light to keep doing what they've always done, because they know you'll let them. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Isn't forgiveness supposed to be a good thing? Yes, it is. When it's earned, when it's safe, when it leads to healing. But in toxic relationships, especially with a child who repeatedly causes emotional harm, forgiveness is often one-sided. It becomes something you give in hopes of repairing something that only you are willing to fix. And that's why we need to flip the script. Forgiveness isn't about fixing them. It's about freeing you. It's not about making them feel better. It's about making you feel whole again. It's not about letting them off the hook. It's about unhooking yourself from years of pain, guilt, and confusion. And to do that, you need something many parents forget they're allowed to have: boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They're not punishments. They're lines that protect your peace, your health, and your heart. You can still love someone and say, "No more yelling." You can still care deeply and say, "I won't be talked to like that." You can still hope for change and say, "Until you take responsibility, I need distance." Forgiveness without boundaries is like handing someone a match and standing next to your house made of wood. But forgiveness with boundaries, that's where real healing begins. So if you've been hurt by your child, if you've given second, third, or 20th chances only to be hurt again, it's okay to stop. It's okay to protect yourself. It's okay to say, "I forgive, but I don't forget, and I don't allow this behavior in my life anymore." That doesn't make you a bad parent. That makes you a person who's finally choosing peace. Because there's something else you need to remember, especially if you're in your 60s, 70s, or even 80s. Your life is not over. You are not here to spend your golden years recovering from old wounds. You are not too old to grow, to heal, to create peace in your own home, your own heart. If your child won't meet you with respect, you can love them from a distance. If they won't acknowledge the pain they've caused, you don't have to pretend it never happened. You can forgive silently, privately, in your own way, on your own terms. And that forgiveness can sound like this: "I let go of the hope that you'll change. I release the need to fix what you keep breaking. I choose peace. I choose me." There comes a moment in life, often later than we expect, when we finally realize that love does not mean unlimited access. It does not mean endless chances. And it certainly does not mean sacrificing your well-being just to keep the peace. If you're listening to this and quietly nodding, it's likely because something inside you already knows the truth. You felt it in your body, in the tension in your chest before a phone call, in the exhaustion that lingers long after a visit, in the way your joy seems to drain whenever their name appears on your screen. That feeling is not weakness. It's wisdom. One of the hardest realities for parents to accept is this: sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and even for your child, is to stop participating in the damage. Not every relationship can be repaired by patience alone. Not every wound heals with time. And not every apology deserves forgiveness in the way we were taught growing up. This brings us to something deeply important, something that often gets overlooked when people talk about forgiveness. A child who repeatedly causes emotional harm does not experience forgiveness the way you do. To you, forgiveness is about peace, reconciliation, and relief. To them, Forgiveness often becomes a reset button, one that erases accountability and restores control. They don't see forgiveness as a turning point. They see it as confirmation that nothing truly has to change. And that's why offering forgiveness directly to a child who continues these harmful patterns can keep you stuck in a loop that never ends. You forgive, they return. You hope, they hurt. You explain, they deny. You cry, they dismiss. Over time, you begin to feel smaller, quieter, less certain of yourself. And that's not because you're failing, it's because the relationship itself is slowly eroding your sense of self. At this stage of life, your energy matters. Your health matters. Your peace matters. You've already spent decades caring for others. You've earned the right to choose calm over chaos. There's a quiet strength in stepping back and saying, I will no longer chase respect. I will no longer beg for kindness. I will no longer forgive behavior that continues to harm me. That doesn't mean you're bitter. It means you're awake. And here's something many parents need to hear, especially those who grew up believing that family must come before everything else. You are not obligated to endure emotional harm simply because the person causing it shares your DNA. Being a parent does not mean being a lifelong emotional shield for someone who refuses to grow. You can love without access. You can care without engagement. You can forgive without reconnecting. True forgiveness, the kind that actually heals, happens inside you. It's a quiet decision to stop carrying anger, not a public announcement or a conversation that leaves you drained and doubting yourself. It's releasing the hope that they will one day become the child you imagined and accepting the reality of who they are right now. That acceptance is painful, but it's also freeing. When you stop expecting empathy from someone who cannot give it, you stop being disappointed. When you stop explaining yourself to someone who refuses to understand, you reclaim your voice. When you stop forgiving out of guilt, you start choosing yourself. And that choice matters more now than ever. Your later years are not meant to be spent repairing damage that isn't yours to fix. They are meant for peace, for simplicity, for relationships that nourish rather than drain you. Whether that means stronger boundaries, limited contact, or emotional distance, only you can decide what feels safe. And safety, emotional safety, is not selfish. It's essential. If no one has told you this yet, let me say it clearly. You did your best. You loved deeply. You tried. And that is enough. You don't need to keep proving your worth by forgiving pain that keeps repeating. You don't need to reopen old wounds just to appear loving. You don't need to sacrifice your well-being to meet someone else's expectations. Forgiveness does not mean access. Forgiveness does not mean silence. Forgiveness does not mean accepting harm. It means letting go of what no longer serves you. And if this message resonates with you, if you've lived this reality or are living it right now, you're not alone. I invite you to share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Your story may help someone else feel seen, understood, or strong enough to take their next step toward peace. If you found this video helpful, please like the video and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. This channel is here to support you with honest conversations, practical guidance, and reminders that your life, your voice, and your peace still matter deeply. No matter your age, it's never too late to choose calm over chaos, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over guilt. Here's to living your best life with strength, dignity, and peace at every age.